Hi everyone, this is Robert. Welcome to IDG Live. Today we are looking at Daemon Blackfyre, the great bastard who started the Blackfyre rebellions. He's a character that we touched on a couple of times in the last couple of live streams, but I thought he's so important it's worth actually focusing in on him personally for one of these live streams. What I'll do is, as always, I'll try and pick up as many questions, obviously from my patrons, as many questions as I can in the chat as we're going through. But I thought I'll start, as I try to always, with a bit of an overview, a bit of a history of who he is and where he fits into the grand scheme of things. So Daemon Blackfyre was born in the year 170 AC, 170 years after the conquest. Now, what I will probably do actually to show where he fits in is to start by talking about his mother, because his mother is a really crucial part of this. This is an understanding who he is and why he was from his very birth treated as being different, special, unlike the other great bastards that we have. His mother was Dana Targaryen. Dana Targaryen was the third-born child, the eldest daughter of Aegon III Targaryen. Yes, that's the Aegon III after the Dance of the Dragons. Her two older brothers, first of all, her older brother, Deeron the young dragon, had died, and Baelor, her other brother, became king. She had been married to Baelor against both of their wishes. Baelor, we looked at before, Baelor the Blessed. He was an incredibly holy man, certainly in his own sight, and he didn't want to be married to her. She was an incredibly free-spirited person, a very strong. George R. Martin says that she's very much like a typical Targaryen. She also seemed to have a bit of a sense of drama about her, and her sense, her dress sense. She would typically wear either all black or all white, and when after they were married, but they did not consummate their marriage, then she went around wearing all white just to sort of show that she was, she, in her mind, wronged by this. Baelor, when he became king, he first of all got their marriage annulled, and then sent her and her two sisters to be effectively imprisoned in the Maiden Vault, which is their chambers. This is what it's called now, but this is their chambers in the Red Keep. This lasted a decade or more, and it's the idea was that they were being locked away from the lustful gaze of both Baelor himself and also anyone else. He was keeping them away from everyone. Nobody came in, nobody went out. Now, this did not work perfectly, because Dana was not the kind of person who was just going to allow herself to be trapped in her own chambers. At least 3 times she manages to escape, to dress up as one of the members of the small folk, something like that, sneak out. And then the last time she comes back and she's pregnant. And it's like, okay, so what's going on here? She gets quizzed. Whose is this? Whose child is this? Who have you been meeting? And she does not say. Understandably, because obviously, yes, she's getting in trouble, but whoever the father is would also be getting into trouble with the king. So she does not say. She gives birth to her son, who she names Daemon. This is the Daemon we're talking about now. And so he is born. First of all, he's named after, yes, the Daemon we know, Daemon Targaryen from the Dance of the Dragons, who I think Matt Smith has done a fantastic job, but if anything, he underplays the character that George R.R. Martin has created there. Daemon Targaryen was the terror and the glory of his age. He is the person around whom all of the events, he's at the center of the action all the time. Mad, bad, dangerous to know. This was a statement by Dana calling her newborn child Daemon and saying he is named after Daemon Targaryen. So that's the first thing that we've got going for him. The second thing is that Baelor, her ex-husband, the king, is so distraught by this secret pregnancy, by the fact that she's escaped, by the fact he doesn't know who the father is, by the fact that there's this new Targaryen running around. He then goes on effectively a hunger strike. He goes on a fast. He's done this several times before, but this time it's a very long one, over 40 days. And it's at the end of this that he dies. And so Daemon, before he's even a year old, he is this figure of great mystery to the realm. Who is his father? And he's been given a name that that is reminiscent of one of the most charismatic, horrific, brilliant, conflicted people in history to that point. And his very birth led directly to the death of a king. So this is before he's done anything. He has got off to a hugely important start. He is being set out as being different. And for the next 12 years, his parentage is never fully revealed. Dana, sadly, then disappears from the history books that we know. We're not told anything about what happens to her afterwards. But Daemon appears to be brought up in the Red Keep. He's clearly a Targaryen. He looks Targaryen to start with. We know that his mother was a Targaryen. He can trace his lineage up through his mother up to Daemon Targaryen and Rhaenyra. He has got the perfect Targaryen features, the silver gold hair. He's got the purple eyes. When he grows up to manhood, people say he looks like Aegon the Conqueror. Now, nobody obviously will remember what Aegon the Conqueror looked like exactly, but this was the highest compliment you could give to a Targaryen, to be reminiscent of Aegon the Conqueror. And he was trained in the Red Keep by the greatest swordsman around. And he became a very, very good fighter. And at the age of 12, by this point, Aegon IV, who we looked at a couple of weeks ago, Aegon IV has become king. And by Daemon enters a squire's tourney, which he wins. And he is knighted by Aegon IV, at which point Aegon IV acknowledges that this actually, he's mine. This is my son. He acknowledges him, he knights him, and he gives him the sword Blackfyre. We've talked about this before. Blackfyre is not just a sword, a cool sword. This is the sword of kings. Now, it's not a matter of if you have this sword, you are the king. It's not that strong a link, but it is a very strong. The great Targaryen kings had this sword. Daemon I wielded this sword. Aegon the Conqueror wielded this sword. Jaehaerys, Maegor, they wielded this sword. And now the king, Aegon IV, who, although in his younger days, yes, probably was quite a good fighter, now wasn't. He was getting older and more portly. He handed this sword onto his acknowledged bastard son, leading people immediately to be going, what's that about? So by the age of 12, he is this, without achieving huge amounts himself personally, he's already this center of focus. Another thing which I forgot to mention is that at the time of his birth, there was even a campaign for his mother to be crowned, because she was the eldest living child of Aegon III, so perhaps she should be made ruling queen. So here he is, the son of a king, the son of a woman who could have been ruling queen herself, holding the king's sword, Blackfyre, looking like Aegon the Conqueror, being named after one of the most legendary characters of recent Targaryen history, Daemon Targaryen. And as far as we can tell, he's charming, he's intelligent, he comes across really well, but he's a bastard. That's where he starts off. All the while, the future Daemon II is the named heir. The situation in court, though, was that he had he'd merged the realms, he'd brought Dawn into the Seven Kingdoms. His wife was Dornish. Their son, eldest son, Baelor Breakspear, great guy as far as we can tell, he looked Dornish. So when people were looking at who is the who of these people is the more Targaryen, it's not even close. The only issue is this issue of him being a bastard. Now, as Aegon IV's reign sort of slowly meandered towards its inevitable end, the rumours then started to come out that Daemon himself might be a bastard. Is that possible? It's possible. But all of this meant that through his life and upbringing, Daemon, who took the sword name, this was how big and important a deal it was, as his new surname, Blackfyre, I'll take that as my new surname. Daemon Blackfyre was always being thought of as being, if not, this guy should be king, but wouldn't it be great if this guy were king? He looks the part, he acts the part, he's got the heritage, he's got the sword. And this carried on through his life. Now, personally, I think it's probably to his credit that he didn't, as far as we can tell, when his father died, he didn't even consider launching a coup attempt. Daemon hurried over from Dragonstone just in case, but nope, doesn't seem to have been a problem. He, in fact, he seemed to take on this approach of, well, I could try and sort of like make enemies of these other potential kings, potential rivals, but no, he wouldn't. He actually gave him a tract of land not too far from King's Landing. He gave him permission to build a castle there, which is a huge thing. If you're given permission to build a castle, that means that you're being trusted, because a castle can be a place where people can rally around. This is obviously defendable, particularly with the absence of dragons now. Having a castle was massive, and Daemon decided, I'll let Daemon have a castle, and a castle close to King's Landing. However, one thing we do know during this time is that not everything was sweetness and light. There were, behind the scenes, several love affairs which seemed to have been going on, sometimes unrequited, sometimes kept apart, and politics often seemed to get in the way. Aegon IV, while he was still alive, decided that his bastard son Daemon should marry the daughter of the Archon of Tyrosh. So this is trying to get closer links with the Free Cities. It's a fair and reasonable diplomatic thing to do. However, Daemon appears not to have particularly wanted this. He seems to have been in love, as far as we can tell, with Daenerys, the first Daenerys. And this is Daeron's sister. But Daeron decides, actually, so we need to go through with that marriage. Daemon has to be marrying over to with Tyrosh. That happened. And Daenerys, in order to get Dawn into the Seven Kingdoms, he married her into the Martell family. And she went off and lived in Sunspear, in the Water Gardens, for the rest of her life. So that love affair, if it was, and everybody seems to think that this was the case, never came to anything. The rumours started to spread that Daemon had perhaps been assured by his father, when this idea first was put about, that it's okay, you marry this this foreigner, but you're a Targaryen. You can marry more than once. You can have a second wife. You could have Daenerys as your second wife. That's okay. So Daemon, however, said no to that. He had other ideas. So by this point, once we're just a handful of years into the reign of Daemon II, we've still not seen anything from Daemon by way of outright opposition, despite the fact that there are lots of things which seem to be not quite going his way. And a lot of the lords who had been in favour while Aegon IV was king suddenly found themselves not in favour, because there was this new group of Dornish nobles who'd come in, and they were at the heart of the court these days. So there was a lot of people who were looking for someone to rally around. And Daemon, for all the reasons we've already mentioned, seemed to be the most obvious candidate. But still, no, nothing. He didn't seem to rebel at all. Time moves on. 8 more years after the marriage of his love, Daenerys, to the Martells, suddenly we get the outbreak of the Blackfyre Rebellion. Where from? This doesn't seem to have been a knee-jerk reaction to either his forced marriage or the forced marriage of the woman that he loved. This wasn't a reaction to being given the sword Blackfyre. He'd had that for years by that point. This wasn't a reaction to anything in particular that Daemon did, as far as we can tell. It seems to have been just the drip, drip, drip of people talking in his ear saying, you should be king. And in particular, Aegor Rivers. Aegor Rivers was one of the other great bastards, as they were known, the bastard children of Aegon IV, who their mothers were of noble birth themselves. So he seemed to be planting this idea and planting this idea and planting this idea. He then got himself married into Daemon's family, and he kept on pushing it, kept on pushing it. The war itself started, however, effectively before he declared. Now, what we're told is that Bloodraven told Daemon II, Daemon is going to declare to be king in about a month's time. You really should stop him doing that. And so Daemon then went off and tried to capture him. Daemon escaped. And then because of the fact that the king had tried to capture him, this then gave them a reason for splitting and for declaring war, calling the troops to rally round him. So there never was this moment where he said, "Aha, I should be king. Gather round here, everybody." It was Maura. He tried to capture me. Come on, we've got to move now. It was never clear cut, the start to that rebellion. Nevertheless, he did gather an army around him, and in particular, it was the half, we're told, pretty much divided in half, the noble lords of the land. This was very different from when you go back to the Dance of the Dragons. The big factor there was who's got the dragons. There are no dragons anymore. Now it is who's got the balance of the lords and noble families in the land. And it was about 50-50. We're not told huge amounts about the early part of the war. All we're told is that in about a year in, we get to the decisive battle, which is the Battle of the Red Grass Field. In this, pretty much all of the rebellious army is there. And they seem to have got into position before the loyalist army had managed to get themselves really sorted. So they charge in. There's the vanguard. Lord Arryn is there for the loyalists, and a member of the Kingsguard called Gwaine Corbray. But the Black Dragons, as they became known, this was Daemon Blackfyre's, he became known as the Black Dragon. His army pushed back the loyalists, and they were winning. Daemon himself had a one-on-one combat with Gwaine Corbray in the middle of this battle. It lasted an hour, we're told. The Corbrays they've got a Lady Forlorn, a Valyrian steel sword of their own. Daemon was wielding Blackfyre. This went on for an hour until Gwaine Corbray was unhorsed. At which point we get one of the few actual details, and this is intriguing about Daemon, is we get so few actual details of things he said or things he specifically did. But here we do get a detail in the heat of this battle. He, having unhorsed Gwaine Corbray, he then jumps from his own horse and prevents everybody else from trampling over this person he vanquished. In fact, he gets people to carry Gwaine Corbray off the field so that he wouldn't die. He would survive the battle. This, amidst everything, seems like a noble act. We're not told any other details about it, but it seems like it was a noble act. But at that point, the delay that happened there allowed Bloodraven, who just arrived on the scene, to get up onto a vantage point, a hill overlooking the battlefield, with his archers, and then they rained arrows down on the rebellious army, down on Daemon's army. First of all, his eldest son died. Then he himself was killed by the arrows coming at him. His youngest son picked up the sword of Blackfyre from his dead hand. His youngest son also dies. Then finally we get Aegor Rivers, this other great bastard who'd been there perhaps behind all of this to start with. He picks up Blackfyre, charges at Bloodraven and Bloodraven's troops. They have a battle that caused the injury that makes Bloodraven lose his eye, but the battle is lost. Aegor Rivers heads off with Blackfyre and the remnants of the family, of the Blackfyre family, over to Essos. And that is the end of the first Blackfyre rebellion. After that, there are 4 more Blackfyre rebellions, the descendants of this original Daemon Blackfyre. So that's his story. As I said, I think the thing which is most fascinating about this is that he doesn't really get a voice. We don't see things that he specifically did. We get anecdotes about him winning a tourney. We get an anecdote about what happened there in the battle with Gwaine Corbray. Other than that, he's still a bit of a mystery in the way that George R.R. Martin wrote him. However, when you look through at what he didn't do, it's very clear that he didn't challenge Deeren for the kingship early on. He waited. The best, maybe you could say he was always wanting to, but he was very patient. But the clear implication was that no, he just didn't want to until finally he got pushed into it. So my contention is that Daemon Blackfyre, we don't have this written down anywhere, but this seems to be the best way to fit the facts. He was a reluctant insurgent. He was not power hungry. He had to be really pushed into this. This is not the kind of person we have when we're looking back at, say, the Dance of the Dragons, where it's very clear both sides were desperate for power. The moment the old king dies, that's it. Bam, we're going straight into war as quickly as possible. This was 12 years after the death of the old king before Daemon Blackfyre actually started his rebellion. And even then, it seemed a little bit slow, which does, and we will get onto this, it does raise the possibility that perhaps the driving force was not him. Perhaps the driving force was Aegor Rivers. Perhaps there was a driving force on the other side, which was Bloodraven. Perhaps we think of this as being the Blackfyre rebellions, but perhaps he is just the figurehead, not the person driving all of this action. So I think we should be cautious about interpreting him as just being a rebel. That's how the history books remember him, but he was a reluctant rebel. Okay, let's have a quick look in the chat. I think I've probably lost a couple of questions before. I've been talking for a little while. I think I lost a couple of questions. I'll try and find them that appeared off the top of the chat. I can't find them. Apologies. I know somebody did a super chat just before I started that I've lost right now. So apologies for that. I will try and find that again. Oh no, here it is. G81. Yes, I just see that, and absolutely, your T-shirt will be in the post very soon to you. I hope you like it. Yes, and this does give me the opportunity to plug once more this wonderful bit of merch. I can say it's wonderful because the design is not mine. This is Sam Rixian, an excellent artist here in the Song of Ice and Fire community. If you would like that, the best and cheapest way for you to get hold of that is through joining my Patreon at the $10 or above level. That's the cheapest way of doing it. That offer is open until the end of this month. So you've got 2 or 3 more days or whatever it is until the end of June as I'm recording this. You could also, if you do not wish to do that, you can also go down here. You should see my little shop. It is available through there as well. So yeah, now is your chance to get hold of that. If you are already a patron at $10 or above, I will happily send you one. Just anyway, just let me know your details and I'll put one into the post. If you're a patron below $10, you can just upgrade to $10 and I'll send you one as well. Okay, merch plugging done. Let's go to I think I had another question somewhere. Rosemary Moonrise saying mad, bad and dangerous to know sounds like a song line. It's actually a description of Lord Byron. I can't remember who came out with it, but this is a real life person, a real life character, a poet, and he was a great friend of Shelley. He was there. The legendary stories about the short story competition, which led to Mary Shelley creating Frankenstein. He was there, and he was known as mad, bad, and dangerous to know because he got everyone into trouble. Martin S. saying, what did this Blackfyre sword look like? Was it forged from Valyrian steel? Yes, it was forged from Valyrian steel. It's actually the behind me is, you can just see a little the hilt of it, but that gives the idea. It was a two-handed sword. This was very much I would say a big and heavy sword. Valyrian steel is light, but it's a two-handed sword. It's also darker steel than normal because it was Valyrian steel itself can have these kind of colored rippled effects, but this gained an extra dark tint to it because this was when Aegon the Conqueror was cremated with I think it was Balerion, it might have been Vagar, providing the flames. He was holding his sword, Blackfyre, and then it was rescued by Maegor afterwards from the flames, and it was darkened because of that. So yes, double-handed sword, quite light but incredibly powerful, with a slightly darkened sort of tint to it. See what other questions. I'm sure I've got some more questions here. Yep, question. So G81 again. Hello, saying John Potts. I think this might be picking up for a question from somebody else. Thank you very much. If so, that's very kind. Always wonder exactly how significant he won many tourneys really is. Daemon and Rhaegar. You have to imagine people would be reluctant to beat a royal. Yes, I mean, this is very true, and this is actually something which has the potential to be significant in the plot of A Song of Ice and Fire, because this is one of the things that Ned points out to Robert Baratheon when Robert Baratheon was going to be entering the lists himself and joining a tourney. This is where we get the "fetch me my breastplate" stretcher line, but Ned persuaded him not to because of this very reason, is that seriously, who's going to be unhorsing a king? And we get a hint of that when we get the recollections back to the tourney at Harrenhal, which is so much stuff happened at the tourney at Harrenhal, and Rhaegar won. But the question is, I mean, he clearly was a great fighter, but were the people not going at full tilt against him, because him winning made him look very impressive. The tourney at Harrenhal, if you remember, this was a setup before King Aerys II, the Mad King, descended onto it. This was a setup to make Rhaegar look big and impressive, and potentially him launch his own coup. So yes, one of the royals winning, if they're the only one in the competition, you always have to put a little asterisk next to their name. I think that people like Daemon, both Daemons, in fact, clearly were very good anyway. Got a question. Callie Summers saying, is there any echo of Lannisters and Reynes with the Targaryens and Blackfyres? Yes, there is a sort of an echo. The Reynes of Castamere were, this is during Tywin's younger days, they were challenging the Lannisters for basically being the most important house in the Westerlands, and Tywin just destroyed them, completely killed all of them in a particularly brutal way. And he used that as a way to show this is what happens to people who oppose us. This is where the song, The Reigns of Castamere, comes in and is very important, because that is used by him as a way to remind people of what he does to people who oppose him. There was another mini rebellion, and all Tywin had to do was send a bard up to the castle, sing that singing that song, The Rains of Castamere, and everybody got the message. Okay, if we carry on with this, then he's going to destroy us all. So that was what was going on there. Is there an echo here with the Blackfyres? The echo is there in destroying the entire family line. This seems to be a Bloodraven thing. The other kings of the Seven Kingdoms, they happily put down each of these different insurrections, rebellions when they happened, but Bloodraven seems to have gone out of his way to make sure that each and every last Blackfyre is killed. He personally killed, I think, 4 of them, and made sure that the rest died as well. There was one time when he gave the crown's guarantee of safety for one of these Blackfyres to come over to the Seven Kingdoms. The moment they arrived, he captured them and killed them. That's how serious he was definitely wanting to do that. So there's that as an echo. It's not exactly the same thing because the Blackfyre rebellions took place over decades. So it wasn't just a one-off, we're getting rid of the entire family. Reflective Ramblings asking in intro news, did I speak about Con of Thrones being cancelled, in case someone's listening but hadn't heard? If you so as of the time I'm recording this, literally just a few hours ago, Con of Thrones 2023 has been cancelled. So if you were going to go to that, or if you were considering going to that, then it's not going to be happening. If you want the reasons for that, they've tweeted out about it. I have retweeted it, so you can find them through my Twitter if you would like. That's a shame. I was considering going myself, but that's not happening anymore. So another con, another time. It's a question from Philip, saying, might be projecting, but I can't help but think there's a chance Bittersteel leaked that Daemon was going to declare to force Daemon's hand. Well, yes, so this is where we start getting into this issue of who really forced this. Bloodraven heard from somewhere that Daemon was going to declare in a month. Now, that means that Daemon hadn't declared by that point. Can we be sure that he definitely would have done? I don't think we can, given how long he'd been there not declaring his claim to the throne. Then I think that there's a fair chance that he might not have done. So given that Bittersteel, Aegor Rivers, was absolutely 100% wanting this rebellion, the surefire way of doing it is to say it's a bit conspiracy theory. It could be right, is if he managed to sneakily feed that information to Bloodraven, knowing that Bloodraven would tell the king and then try and foil this, then they could use what the king did as a way to justify what they're about to do. So there are layers to this. We haven't got the details. The details will come out as and when we get Fire and Blood Part 2, I feel sure. But yeah, I definitely would say that's not beyond the realm of possibility. Andrew K saying, Honor getting the best of someone yet again. Had Daemon not hesitated there with Corbray, who knows what would have happened? Yeah, absolutely. And this is that we're not told that the line of causality was that strong, as in the time it took him to do that was the time it needed for Bloodraven to get that advantageous position. But clearly, this was a huge point in the battle, because after that, that's when the arrows started coming, and that was the turning point of the battle. So, it's. I think George R. R. Martin is sort of basically saying, "Hey, look, he did this noble deed in the middle of this battle. However, it doesn't get rewarded with good things for him. He gets killed almost straight away afterwards. Maura Lee, hi there, Maura. Great to see you. Shout out to you in particular, saying just a show of love and appreciation for all the fabulous content, stories, and merch. Such a blessing. Thank you, Robert. Thank you. I hugely appreciate you. Andrew K saying yes, Daemon had devils on his shoulders with bitter steel and fireball. Fireball is the he was the master at arms at the Red Keep. He was the person who taught Daemon how to fight, and he was a bit of a legend himself. There's another question. I think I might have caught up now. Oh, I've got one more here. Reflective of rambling. Oh, picking up for T Nickel. Thank you very much. Saying, what are the chances that Blackfyre and Dark Sister end up on opposite sides in A Song of Ice and Fire? Yes, so I think Maura Lee, actually, you had a very similar question to this. Let me just see if I can find that. Yeah, so where is it and where will they end up? We were asking. So let's cover this. So we've got these two swords. The Targaryens had two Valyrian steel swords. The Sword of the Kings, which is Blackfyre, and then Dark Sister, which was sort of handed down often to the person who is in the family, is in the inner circle, but isn't really, it's like the right-hand person. So Visenya had it to start with. Then Bloodraven has it here at this point, and it often is like the second, obviously, Daemon Targaryen had it. The loyal lieutenant tends to get this sword. But this is the last time we know that they were both in Westeros. Blackfyre goes, I did a video about this ages ago. I might redo it, actually. But Blackfyre heads off to Essos. Aegor Rivers founds the Golden Company. And then eventually, after a couple of attempted rebellions, he dies. And we don't know where the sword ends up. The most logical place would be for it to be with the Golden Company. But we see the Golden Company in A Song of Ice and Fire. They don't seem to have the sword. There's never any talk of they have got the great Valyrian steel sword, Blackfyre. So they haven't got it. So where is it? I think the most logical thing is that he kept hold of it for the Blackfyre contender that he wanted to back. It's noticeable he did not back Daemon the second Blackfyre with the second Blackfyre rebellion that we actually see in Dunk and Egg stories in the Mystery Knight. He did not have the sword Blackfyre. So clearly Aegor had not just handed it on to whoever is the heir. He had kept hold of it to give it to the person that he thinks deserves it. So what does that mean? Because it doesn't appear in the hand of any of these other Blackfyres that we see coming down. It's presumably still being held for the heir. Now, if you, and we haven't got time to get into all of this, but if you go with the logic that I think is reasonably strong logic, that the character we know as Fagon claims to be Aegon VI, young Griff, if he is in fact from the Blackfyre line, from the female line of the Blackfyres, because we get told that the Blackfyre line runs out on the male side, not on the female side. If he is from that female side, he will then potentially be presented with this. So this is my general theory, is that the most likely thing is that he will be presented with this, probably by someone like Illyrio, to boost his claim to the Iron Throne, because everybody knows this is the Sword of the Kings. So he will have that there. How long he survives in Westeros, I think, is quite an open question, but I don't think it'll be for long. I think he will take King's Landing, then Daenerys is going to be landing, and I think that probably she will, on the basis of sort of the prophecies we have, she will prove that he's not, in some way, that he's not a true Targaryen, which means that she will get the sword. So I think Daenerys is probably the most likely person to have Blackfyre. As for Dark Sister, Bloodraven had. We had confirmation. The last confirmation we have is that he took it up to the wall. When he joined the Night's Watch, he took it up to the wall. As we have History of Westeros to thank for this. They asked George R. R. Martin this. George R. R. Martin did confirm. Yes, he took it up to the wall with him. It is not at the wall. It is not being held by anyone at the wall. Therefore, the most logical thought is that he also took it north of the wall when he went ranging and then disappeared. So it's probably hidden in Bloodraven's cave, which is where Bran is right now. What does that mean? Well, I think that there's every chance that that gets picked up by, if not Bran himself, then perhaps Maura, and brought down south of the wall again for to be used in the battle against the others. Who will get to wield that? I mean, Maura would be quite a good person, but she's not really a sword person herself. I like this idea that Arya might get it. That works quite well for me. But in any event, it will be there, I think, on the side of the humans fighting against the army of the others. So where do they go after that? I think that's then really into the realms of speculation. But that's where I think those two swords will come back into the story. Another question from Martin S. saying, in George R. R. Martin's world and similar fantasy, as well as real life, a bastard is someone whose birth parents are unmarried. But if parents married after the birth, could the bastard be legitimized retroactively? Well, the king can legitimize a bastard anywhere in the world of Ice and Fire. So yes, that could definitely happen. And I mean, it doesn't really play into this here because Daemon Blackfyre, his parents did not marry, so he definitely was a bastard. However, he was legitimized along with all of the other great bastards on Aegon IV's deathbed. So yes, if what tends to happen though in terms of the born out of wedlock then parents marry is that it's quite a quick thing. So it's like they just their counting of records was often deliberately muddied so that they could sort of head off and then come back and be both married and have a child, and everyone goes, that was very quick, and they go, yes, it was very quick, but yes, this is a legitimate child. So that's the way it often would go. Right, I think that's me largely caught up in the chat, so I'm going to pick up with a few questions from my patrons. Let's start with Johnny Targ saying, Hola, Robert. Apologies, it's been a while since my last post. My wife is expecting our second baby, so I've been busy. Well, I can think of a few better reasons for you not being here. I wish you and your wife every blessing as that day gets nearer. Do you think that Daemon was the brother I loved, as quoted by Bloodraven when he's introduced to Bran Stark, or do you think it was Daemon the First? This is a really interesting question. So, the context for this is in A Song of Ice and Fire. Bran has gone up to Bloodraven's cave. yes, this is Bloodraven up there. And Bran says, hey, I did this kind of magic through the tree and went back in time, and I saw my father and I called out to him, and he heard me and he turned round. And Bloodraven says, yeah, no, that didn't happen. Maybe he heard rustling of the wind or something like that, but you can't contact people in the past. You can't reach out to people through this. And then he says this, because obviously why Bran, he'd lost his father. Of course he wants to contact his father. Bloodraven says this, I have my own ghosts, Bran, a brother that I loved, a brother that I hated, a woman I desired. Through the trees I see them still, but no word of mine has ever reached to them. The past remains the past. We can learn from it, but we cannot change it. Now, to sort of pick up on what's going on in that scene first, before getting to the specific thing you were asking, this is really important, because we often just take what some characters say as being obviously true, particularly if they're very knowledgeable. It's quite clear here that Bloodraven's not right. Bloodraven's saying you can't go back, you can't affect things in the past, you can't do things. But we know that Bran does manage to start interacting with the past. And this is the point at which we're going to start getting this build up to the Hodor moment, because that is him interacting with the past in a way that influences the present. So although I'm a huge believer of when in doubt blame Bloodraven, he's not infallible, he's not perfect, he does not know everything, and here he does seem to have got that wrong. But to return to the question you've got here, this, the brother that I loved, a brother I hated, and a woman I desired. I think you'll find almost everybody agrees the brother he hated was Aegor Rivers, that their rivalry was very clear. And it probably should, just to sort of add to this, that the layer here is that Aegor Rivers, his mother was a Bracken, and Bloodraven's mother was a Blackwood, and the rivalry between those two houses is huge and goes back millennia. So they necessarily would have disliked each other. Added to which, the Blackwood mistress, Melissa Blackwood, to Aegon IV, took over from the Brackens. So the Brackens got kicked out of effective power, and the Blackwoods took over. So there was a rivalry going on there already. He was the one that Bloodraven hated. The woman that he desired almost certainly is Shira Seastar. This, we're told that they were paramours, that he was in love with her. We're told that Bloodraven proposed to her many times. He never said yes. So that is reasonably clear. Then we get this, the brother that I loved. I think the plain text reading of this is probably this is Deeren. Because we're talking here everywhere. These are half brothers and half sisters. Deeren the king is, Bloodraven is loyal to him, fiercely loyal to him all the way through. So the obvious answer is Deeren. The question of a brother that I loved, could this be Daemon Blackfyre, is really intriguing, because we don't know. There's no hint of it. There's no hint of there being any particular animosity or love between the two of them. We're not told of the relationship between the two of them. But it would add another level to what's going on here. If the brother that he loved was being manipulated by the brother he hated to create a war, a civil war that broke the family apart, that would just give a reason more than just hey, Bloodraven's doing his clever master plan. It would give a reason why he was so adamant of trying to wipe out the Blackfyre threat. Now, obviously, the thing against this is that wiping out the Blackfyre threat meant killing Daemon and his children and his children's children, something that Bloodraven seems to do with great relish. So, yes, I like the idea. It would add an extra layer of complexity and nuance to this, but I think the plain text reading of this probably has to be that the brother that he loved was indeed Daemon, the person that we saw that he was close to. Okay, let's go to, got a question from Paul Taylor, saying, hi, Robert, delighted to hear you say the word bastard so much in such a legitimate context. Good word usage there. Thank you very much. Question. So John Potts just asking for clarification. Is Blackfyre the sword a bit like Dawn? The sword is for the House Dane. It's similar in as much as this is like a very ancient and important sword to the family. However, the sword Dawn is unique in as much as it's not a Valyrian steel sword. Lots of families have Valyrian steel swords. Nobody has this. This is a sword forged from a meteorite core that comes to the metal I found in a meteorite core, which slammed into Earth. And it is thousands of years old. As far as we can tell, most of the Valyrian steel swords are probably a few hundred years old, made in the few centuries before the Doom of Valyria, which is about 400 years before the main story. So it's not exactly the same thing. And over the centuries, and with the Sword of Dawn and House Dane, they've added to the sort of the rules. So you can only have, it doesn't get passed down from father to son to ruling lord to ruling lord or something like that. It stays in the castle, it stays in Starfall until someone is worthy enough to use it, until someone is a good enough fighter to be able to use it, which is why we get this situation in the Song of Ice and Fire where we know Arthur Dane, the legendary fighter, member of the Kingsguard, who was around, he was there at the Tower of Joy, etc., etc. He had the sword because he was worthy. But on his death, this was not then passed on to the next in line. It's just there waiting for someone to claim, which is probably going to be plot important going forward, because somebody will claim it who's probably not worthy of it. But the main point is that, yes, there are echoes in that this is an important family heirloom which is passed down from generation to generation. But Dawn, the Sword Dawn, is several notches more significant and old and different to Valyrian steel swords. Question from Rassler saying, hey, Robert, why did none of Aegon the Unworthy's bastards take up the Targaryen name after being legitimized? Which is often wondered myself. Basically, they get legitimized. The great bastards get legitimized. What are they going to do? They are now Targaryens, but they don't take on the name Targaryen. Why is this? Well, probably because Daemon, the oldest, already has a surname, Blackfyre. He's not going to change that. He took on the surname before he was legitimized, and so he doesn't need to change this. If the others took on the surname, then perhaps that might be seen as them being sort of trying to push themselves up slightly higher than social standing than they were. But I think more importantly, those great bastards were such strong characters that they also already had really cool nicknames: Bloodraven, Bittersteel, Shira Seastar. They didn't need the actual word Targaryen. Everybody knew who they were, so they didn't need to be a Targaryen. Their power did not come, and their self-identity did not come from having that particular surname. Greek Weirwood saying they could hyphenate. Yeah, I mean, I suppose they could, but I think it got to the point where you don't really, you don't. I don't think you need to. Brinlin321 saying, "Hi Robert, thanks for everything you do on your channel." Well, thank you very much. My question is, if Aegon IV had explicitly named Daemon his heir on his deathbed instead of legitimizing all his bastards, would the outcome of the Blackfyre rebellion have been the same? I agree with you that Bloodraven had ulterior motives behind supporting Aegon's desired succession, so he would likely have still opposed Daemon. But what of the great houses? Would they have all supported rather than or opposed Daemon? Would Daemon have won if he was explicitly named as the heir? Well, this is obviously in the realms of what ifs, but a few points of clarification here. Bloodraven is very important when we get to the Blackfyre Rebellion, but Bloodraven is young, and at the point at which Aegon IV died and all of the great bastards get legitimized, Bloodraven is just 9. He's still a child at that point. So I don't think he's going to be a major player in what happens there. The question is, where do the nobles of the land, and where is Daemon to start with, and where do the nobles of the land put their backing? Because what you found was that Deeren rushed from Dragonstone into King's Landing and got himself crowned very quickly because he was just a little bit uncertain. That tells me that he just had this nagging doubt at the back of his brain. It wasn't a walkover. It wasn't an automatic. If somebody like Daemon had suddenly declared, he wasn't necessarily going to get it. So if the powers that be rallied around Daemon and he was in the Red Keep and he had Blackfyre in his hand and he got anointed by the High Septon, and everybody swore fealty to him as he sat on the Iron Throne because the king had said that is his named heir, then you are in a situation relatively similar to what happened in the Dance of the Dragons, except for the lack of dragons. He would be looking legitimate, the proper king. And what does Deeren have? He doesn't look particularly impressive himself. So it's possible, is what I'd say. At that point, he hadn't got people rallying around him in the way that he had later on. Half of the kingdom fell behind him when he did declare. I don't know whether half of the kingdom would have rallied behind him straight away. Let's go to Diego Godoy saying, "Hola, Robert. Hola. Did Daemon ever try to get a dragon egg, or was he given one as a child? I wonder if he ever tried that angle of legitimacy." Yeah, it's an interesting one. The short answer is yes, he did try this. So, but a bit late. Now, after the war starts, a thief with the wonderful name Quickfinger steals some dragon's eggs from the Red Keep and tries to smuggle them out and get them to Daemon Blackfyre. as a symbol of legitimacy. He fails. Quick finger, but not quite quick enough. So he, what this tells us, and that's all we know at that point. We don't know who commissioned him. Maybe Igor Rivers, maybe it was Daemon himself, maybe nobody did. He just thought, hey, I often do this of my own volition. But it does seem to imply the fact that before that point, Daemon hadn't thought about this. He hadn't really bothered about it, which again kind of hints at the idea this wasn't his plan all along. If he'd been seriously there thinking for years, oh, I really should be king, he would have been accumulating these kind of symbols of kingship, and he wouldn't have had to steal them much later on after they're already in a war situation. So did he ever try and do it? Yes, but failed. Let's go to a question from Martin S. saying about Randall Tarley and his sword Heartsbane. The Tarleys aren't the main house in the Reach. The Tyrells are, but the house still owned Valyrian steel. Was it Randall's most valuable item? Well, it will have been, yes. So the distribution of Valyrian steel swords in Westeros, it was limited, but there were a significant number. I think Tyrion says that he had seen a catalogue of them there being 200. Now, some of these clearly go missing. Blackfyre obviously goes missing. But what that means is it's not just the top families, the very, very top families that have them. It's not just the Starks. It's not just the Lannisters. Pardon me. The Lannisters had one and then lost it through misadventure, it has to be said. But it's also the next tier down. Quite a few of them also had Valyrian steel swords. So you get the House of Rain, for example, we were talking about a little bit earlier. They had one. And the Tarbecks, as you say, also the Randall Tarley, the House Tarley have Valyrian steel sword. Obviously, then you get the Corbreys over in the Vale had Valyrian steel sword. There are various other ones of these dotted about. It seems to be you either had to have had a lot of cash or perhaps you defeated somebody and managed to claim it as sort of plunder from war. So 200 of which quite a few got lost. Some I think we can probably assume are just not necessarily the big house, maybe some merchants might have them or something like that. But they are so hugely valuable that they are the prized possessions of anyone who has them. Let's go actually roughly halfway through. I always try my very best to thank the moderators. Moderators, thank you. If you're there in the chat watching this live, they're the people who are keeping this such a wonderful, uplifting, safe space for people. So if you could show the moderators a little bit of love, I would hugely appreciate it. They are amazing. And on behalf of me as well, patrons, thank you. Don't forget, if you are a $10 patron or above, do not forget to send me your details so I can get you out one of those amazing t-shirts. So and also, moderators, send me your details too. I want to send you a t-shirt if I can. So that would be good. Michelle Rimo talking about George R. Martin's writing priorities. 100% agree. Wins first. Then I need him working on Fire and Blood 2 and Duncan Egg in tandem. Yeah, it's Winds of Winter first. And then we'll worry about the rest. I suspect he will then quite quickly do a few Duncan Egg stories just as we've got the TV show commissioned. Whether he does Fire and Blood Part 2 after that, who knows? Okay, Tatster saying, "Hi, Robert. First time being a part of the Patreon squad. Very exciting. Welcome. Welcome. My question is, what do you think was the final push for Daemon to rebel? Was there one particular event that pushed him over the edge, or was there more of an amalgamation of reasons? If so, which?" So, yes, I think the short answer is that there wasn't one thing. The thing that people say most, if you go through A Song of Ice and Fire, this actually gets referenced 4 or 5 times in A Song of Ice and Fire. If you're looking for it, what caused the rebellion, the first Blackfyre rebellion, and the majority opinion is that this is because Daemon could not marry the woman he loved. This is clearly not the cause of the rebellion, because he waited 8 years. 8 years is a long time. Even if he still held on to that love or had a good feeling of great betrayal, 8 years says that that's not the trigger to make it happen. We're not told of anything in particular. It certainly wasn't the sword. I don't think we got anywhere an indication that Daemon cared about the amount of Dornish people in court. No hint of that whatsoever. So I don't think it was that. I don't think that he instinctively thought that he was the rightful heir, at least to start with. It seems to have just been he eventually got persuaded, or, as we were exploring a bit earlier, or he got pushed into it by Aegor. Aegor and these ideas getting fed across to Bloodraven, and when Bloodraven tries to stop it, then that pushes everything into war. That, as an idea, that works really well for me, it has to be said, because it fits with the clear impression we get that Daemon was not desperately chomping at the bit all this time to become king. But once he got backed into a corner, he had to go for it. You can't just suddenly go, "Oh, yeah, all right, fair enough." No. The point at which the actual ruling king, was sending people out to come and get you, that's the point you had to put up or shut up, and he went for it. Let's go to a question from King of Imps, saying, "We only ever hear about the 4 great bastards, but we know there were others. What happened to the other progeny of Aegon IV? Did they fade away into history, marry Westerosi noble houses, or did they join the Blackfyre rebellions?" I suspect the answer is we haven't been told, but I'd like to hear the speculation all the same. Okay. Broadly, the answer is we haven't been told. But there are some things that we do know. Yes, we have 4 great bastards that we always talk about. Daemon Blackfyre, Bloodraven, Bittersteel, Charis Eastar. They're the star names in all of this, undeniably. But they're not the only ones. And when we're saying the great bastards, these are the children of noble women, basically. He had almost certainly a huge amount of other children. What happened to them, we are simply not told. However, I mentioned that Melissa Blackwood, the mother of Bloodraven, she was mistress to Aegon IV for quite some time. Actually, I think it was 7 years. She had 3 children with him: Bloodraven, but also Mia and Gwenys Rivers. What happened to them? We don't know. We're not told anything about them. We know that they exist. I think the implication has to be that they probably got married off somewhere, and this sort of extended the influence of the Blackwoods, because they were acknowledged, they were legitimized by the king, so they were important. But they couldn't really play a part in the Blackwood family tree. So this is just empire building for them. Then we also get his, I think it was his fourth official mistress, who was Bielemeier Otheris. Now, she was in Braavos, and she had on and off 10 years as the main mistress. And during that time, we hear of three children, three daughters that she had that were almost certainly Aegon's. Naha and Balerion, yes, Balerion, we don't hear huge amounts about. We know that they exist, but we don't hear huge amounts about them. Bellanora, however, we do hear a little bit about, because she stays in Braavos. She grows up, she stays in Braavos, and then she becomes a courtesan in Braavosi life. Now, this is a position actually of great prestige. If you read the Braavos chapters there with Arya, then you hear that these courtesans are they have great personal power, and she becomes the most well-known and impressive courtesan of them all, and takes the title the Black Pearl of Braavos. She passes this down generation to generation to generation, at which point, with the same names actually, Bellanora and Bielemeier, cropping up through generations, to the point where we get Arya in Braavos. There is still a Black Pearl of Braavos who is a descendant here of Bellanora. So she makes a name for herself, and still has an impact here in the story that we're reading. We then get a possible, when we're not told this is the case, Viserys Plum, who was the son of Elena Targaryen. Now, she was one of the other sisters in the Maiden Vault, and she married off to Lord Plum, who promptly died on his wedding night, but she had a child. Everyone says that this was her husband's child, but also the rumors are maybe it wasn't really, because he was very old and he died on his wedding night, and so maybe this child is actually Aegon IV's child. So is it possible? Yes, it's entirely possible. It does mean that the plums that we see randomly appearing through the story, Brown Ben Plum that Tyrion runs into, Tyrion ponders to himself that perhaps this is a long lost relative, many cousins removed from this Viserys Plum. And there's also a rumor that we hear about in the Mystery Knight, where Lord Butterwell's three maiden daughters were all impregnated by Aegon IV on the same night, and they all had children. We hear no more, so we don't know about that. So, what do we know about the rest of these great bastards? None of them, with the possible exception of Bellanora, none of them make a huge impact on the world, the wider world outside. Most of them, we hear their names, but then they kind of disappear off, which is a bit of a shame. But then perhaps we will find out a bit more about them, as I say, even when we ever do get Fire and Blood Part 2. Caius Ballerina picking up a question for Samuel Sabo. Thank you very much. Saying, was Bloodraven already involved with the children back then? If not, when was he recruited, and was there a shift in his purpose? Well, we don't know. What we do know is that by the time of Duncan Egg, then the rumors of the types of magic that he used were very green seery. that he could see through the eyes of ravens, that he could change into a wolf, that kind of thing. Even at the point of the Battle of the Red Grass Field, which point I think he's something like 21 years old, everybody was saying that he was using magic there. So even at that early-ish age, he was known as a magic user, and the type of that he was using does seem to be quite greenseery. Now, is he already working for the Children of the Forest at that point? I don't think it's easy to say. He will have been shaped both by his mother's Blackwood old gods worshipping history, and also the Targaryen side of the Targaryen magic. Shira Seastar, his half sister, she is also described as being a magician, a sorceress. So they were very close, those two. She also brought magic into this. So my instinct is that when he was younger, yes, he was this natural greenseer, but he was doing a lot broader type of magic across the piece. It's only later on when he goes up to the wall and then he encounters the children himself. That's the point at which he really becomes Team Children of the Forest. Here, I think he may well have been working on prophecies and things that he himself will have been aware, which came down through the Targaryen side, but more of that in a bit. Martin S. saying, do you think George R. Martin will write a story a century or three in the future from A Song of Ice and Fire? No, I don't think so. For two reasons. The first one is the one that I suspect many of us fear, which is that he's got so much on now. If he completes The Winds of Winter, the Dunk and Egg stories, A Dream of Spring, and Fire and Blood Part 2, I think everyone would be absolutely delighted because he's not a young man anymore. For him to do something else on top of that, I think really would be pushing our luck a little bit. So that's, I think, the first thing. The second, he's never really given that kind of impression of wanting to sort of look back on this and say what happens going on into the future. Maybe we'll get little bits like Tolkien did, for example, that we know the outlines of what happened after The Lord of the Rings, but we're not actually given a whole story. He did try and start writing a story a couple of times, actually, but never really progressed with it. So no, I don't think that's really in his mind to do. I think that he thinks that he's still got a huge amount of the world and the story he is presenting to us now to finish before he even thinks about something else. So what has become increasingly apparent is that he sees even things like Fire and Blood, House of the Dragon, as playing into this wider narrative, Ice and Fire. The Song of Ice and Fire. The thing, sort of going into meta-analysis here, but the thing which will be the end of his overall narrative arc is when whatever it was that put the seasons out of balance gets stopped. That they didn't really cover that in the TV show at all. But this is the thing. If you look at the blurb on the back of the very first edition of the very first book, it starts by saying, this is a paraphrase, but it's something along the lines of, a preternatural event way back in history has left the seasons in Planetos out of balance. then it goes on to say other things. So that is the great thing. Something happened way back in the past that put the seasons out of balance. And for his meta-narrative arc to come to an end means that gets put right in some way. Now, does that mean that he doesn't then want to do another story century or so after all of that, looking back and saying, this is how humanity tried to repair itself afterwards? I mean, it doesn't mean he won't, but that means that he will have told his story, and this is a massive story. So I think the first thought in his head is not going to be, now I want to see what happens after this and have a whole new arc of a story. Okay. Let's go to a question from Commander Ray. Do you think Aegon IV's affection for Daemon has a lot to do with Daemon's mother? I wish we knew more of her story. She's such an intriguing character, and based on Aegon's actions, seemed to have left quite the impact. For a second part, how did his mother affect Daemon? Was he raised knowing her as his mother? George says the human heart at conflict with itself is the only thing worth writing about, and I'm curious if the love of this woman, who we know so little about after the birth of Daemon, has a larger role in the rebellion than just Daemon suddenly realizing he agrees with his brother. Yes, so this is one of the big mysteries. There are lots of mysteries of characters who seem amazing and then disappear. Shira Seastar is a classic example of this. We simply don't know. We get introduced to her as being intriguing, sorceress, great bastard, but then we're not told what happens to her at all. But Daemon Targaryen is the same. We're told that she has her child. We're told that there are calls for potentially that she maybe should be the new queen. And then that's it. We're not told anything about, I mean, did she die? Was she alive all the way through this period? Did she marry someone? What happened? We simply do not have an idea. What we do know is that she seemed to be incredibly independent-minded, and Daemon did know who his mother was. I think because we're not told, and she died straight afterwards, and I think we probably would do, the implication is that she must have stayed around for a while. So presumably she did bring him up. But without telling him, we have to assume who his father was. Might this have affected Aegon IV? Might Dana have affected Aegon IV? Perhaps, though. I don't think we can. He was just who he was, and I don't think that we can sort of say everything is a reaction to a particular woman. The women that he surrounded himself with seem to have been not just beautiful women, but that he seems to have had as his mistress, his main mistress, intelligent, driven, powerful women in their own right. So maybe he picked up that taste at quite a young age, so to speak. But I don't think that we can draw a line between her and Aegon IV's actions. Drawing a line between her and Daemon, however, is quite interesting, because she also, it appears, had the option to put forward her claim and did not. And how was she treated after that? Because this is perhaps where we get this moment, because Daemon could perhaps have pushed his claim earlier than he did. and decided not to. Is that because he thought it's what his mother did and that was the right decision? The implication seems to be that if he'd seen what she did and disagreed with it, then he probably wouldn't have taken so long in declaring himself. But whatever it is, she doesn't seem to have proactively said to him, "You are the king's son. You should be king yourself." That doesn't seem to have been the thing which she has said to him, or he rejected it. It's always hard trying to argue from silence because we literally know no information about her, but she seems incredibly driven, incredibly capable, and the fact that she did not claim the crown does seem to be the one thing we can say that does seem to have had an impact on him. Let's go to just have a quick flick through chat. Let's go to question 444. Was Daemon effectively sentenced to death at the moment when he received Blackfyre? Who wanted his death? Was it the Weirwood network, or rather Bloodraven? What about Aegon IV's legitimized bastards who weren't in the Targaryen line, or any of the great bastards? Do you think Bloodraven killed them too? Do we have any proof or clue of the Weirwood network interference in Targaryen succession line before Bloodraven? Okay, so a few little questions there. First of all, was Daemon Blackfyre effectively sentenced to death the moment when he received Blackfyre? I think the answer there is no. I think that he took the sword, but because at no point he was named heir, at no point did he try to claim anything more than he had been given. I think if Aegor Rivers had not been pushing this issue, there's a fair chance that Daemon Blackfyre would never have rebelled. And that, therefore, when he died, what would he do with his sword? The question is, did he then think this was a family heirloom that he handed down to his children, or would the real kings come and claim it back? That would be the critical bit for me. As far as the sort of the Weirwood network are concerned, before this, do we see any signs of the Weirwood network manipulating events at all? Not specifically. We did have Joe Magician, friend of the channel. At some point, I'm going to have him on to talk about, in House of the Dragon, how Larys the Clubfoot, seems to have a lot of Weirwoody vibes to him. Now, I won't spoil all of what he's theorized. If you've not come across it, if you're intrigued, go have a look at his channel. But always with House of the Dragon, in a way that we shouldn't with Game of Thrones, House of the Dragon has had the thumbs up from George R. R. Martin. So we should be on the lookout for things that perhaps George R. R. Martin is wanting to drop in there. And Larys Strong comes from House Strong. This is an First Men family. It's the first thing to be saying here. And on the show, he is constantly being shown, or consistently being shown, with kind of Weirwood imagery. There's a couple of times when he's talking to Alicent, and they're there in front of the Weirwood tree. The Weirwood tree that was not, we weren't particularly expecting a Weirwood tree to be appearing in King's Landing, let alone for the show, let alone have such a prominent role. There are times at which he is speaking, but you cannot see him. You can just see a Weirwood tree. The question is he a Greenseer? Is that how he's getting all his information about what's going on, in the same way that Bloodraven seems to be getting his information? It's possible. We haven't heard. There's Matthew Needham, the actor, has been asked something along these lines, and he's sort of vaguely evasive, but never in a way that makes you go, oh, he's clearly trying to hide such and such a thing. For me, the manipulation of the Targaryen family tree starts at around this point. And when I say the manipulation of the Targaryen family tree, is that it should be expanding out hugely. We've got all of these great bastards. We've got lots of natural born, legitimate children, and over the course of the next quarter of a century, they will die at a rate of about one a year. Some through accidents, some through Bloodraven personally killing them, some through old age, lots of different reasons. Choking on a lamprey pie, this kind of thing again and again, with the Targaryens get taken out of the line of succession. That, for me, is the first point at which I can look at something and go, the family tree is at this point being manipulated in some way. Might Bloodraven have killed off all of those other bastard children? We're not told, but it genuinely wouldn't surprise me. It genuinely would not surprise me at all. We're not told about any of these, what happens with any of these other bastard children, but maybe that's because there's nothing to tell. They lived short lives. We see that again. The spy master, the master of whispers, does echo through time, and Varys definitely has this kind of role of understanding where all the bastards of Robert Baratheon are. Robert Baratheon does echo Aegon IV quite a lot. He, however, is sort of protecting them, and then it's Cersei who's getting rid of them. So is Bloodraven playing the Varys role here or the Cersei role? Andrew Case saying, with House of the Dragons Larys, not sure I can see them getting to Larys being one of the voices wanting to end the conflict where they've taken the character. Yeah, it'll be interesting to see. I mean, it's a little bit of a digression, but in the Dance of the Dragons, when we get towards the end of the war, suddenly you get emerging from all this some people who just are tired of it. They've just had enough. They just want the war to stop now. And they work actively behind the scenes to try to make sure that the war does stop. One of those people is Larys Strong. It's harder to see how he moves into that role in the next 20 episodes, which is where we'd have to be. I'm still expecting at the moment for there to be about 4 seasons of House of the Dragon focusing in on the Dance of the Dragons, and by the 4th season, that's where he needs to be. He needs to be proactively trying to get peace, and that would require quite a shift from that character. Let's go to a question from Maura Lee saying, Daemon was known as the Black Dragon and Daemon known as the Red Dragon. This reminds me of the Dance of the Dragons with the green and black teams. Could you compare and contrast the two factions doing it for those 2 different civil wars? Yeah, so these civil wars do have echoes. The similar questions, the similar arguments are being used both times. The same symbolic things. Who has the sword? Blackfyre. Questions of who did the old king say, this is my heir? Does that matter? Or actually, should we be looking at who the best person really is? and questions of who's being anointed by the High Septon, who's managing to get people onto their side. But there's a huge difference here. And also, incidentally, I think another thing is the potential for the main drivers of all of this to not actually be the people who will potentially end up on the Iron Throne. Certainly, the main drivers on Team Green, it's not Aegon II himself. He's not the person pushing all of this. There are lots of people behind him pushing this, and whereas Rhaenyra is a lot more proactive herself, you particularly in the book you see people like Daemon, Corlys Velaryon doing a lot of things behind the scenes, being just as powerful as her. That is definitely the case in what is going on here. Daemon doesn't get involved in the Battle of the Red Grass Field. He delegates that to other people. Bloodraven is clearly pulling strings. Aegor Rivers, Bittersteel is clearly pulling strings. But the big difference between these two civil wars is dragons. Is that this is now just a normal civil war. And the way to win the normal civil war is to get as many people allied onto your side and then try to win the significant battle. That's how the civil war is fought. Completely different to the Dance of the Dragons, which is about who's got the dragons, who's controlling dragons. If you have 3 dragons and the other side only has 1 dragon, you're going to win. And it is as simple as that, unless they had a massive dragon and your dragons are all teeny tiny. But, you get the point. This was about where the dragons are. Now, no dragons. So George R. R. Martin is echoing it, but showing us how this has changed. This is no longer just the Targaryens can do whatever they want. And it does lead you to the thought process of, well, therefore, does it have to be a Targaryen? Because if the dragons aren't around, then it doesn't have to be a Targaryen, does it? Let's go to George R. R. Tolkien saying, "Salutations, Robert. Salutations to you too, sir. In the World of Ice and Fire, it said that there could have possibly been an agreement between Daemon Blackfyre and Aegon IV to marry Daemon to Rohan of Tyrosh, and afterwards he could take another wife, like Aegon the Conqueror and Maegor did. Do you think this was true or just added in later to make Daemon look more of a bad ruler, like his father?" Also, the thumbnail he shows looks a bit like Henry Cavill. Is this a coincidence with The Witcher Season 3 dropping? So, yeah, if you missed it, Witcher Season 3 Part 1 has dropped today as I'm recording this. It's being released in 2 parts, episodes 1 to 5 now, and then the second half of the season in a month's time. I'm not going to do a review right now. I've literally managed to see about half of the first episode before I've focused in on trying to prepare for this live stream, so I can't really comment on it myself. The reviews seem to be broadly positive as far as I can tell, so yeah, maybe I'll talk a bit more about that next week. But in terms of this potential agreement that Aegon IV was going to make Daemon marry this woman that he didn't particularly like, but he said, well, you can always marry someone else. I think we can 100% believe that this is the kind of thing that Aegon IV would say and do. Whether this is something that Daemon would do, I'm not so sure. He doesn't give the impression from what we've seen so far of being, yes, he looks the part of a Targaryen. Yes, he's a great fighter. Yes, he's got the looks. Yes, he seems to have the charisma, but he doesn't seem to have all of the drives of the Targaryens. So, for example, he's not actively pushing to become king until right at the very end, if even then. He's not. He doesn't seem to have any mistresses that we read of. He seems to have. I mean, he has lots of children with the wife that he marries. So he seems, if anything, he just seems to make the best of what he's been given. We don't hear of him pining after Daenerys. He seems to just accept it, and accept it for 8 years before he declares himself. So is it possible? I mean, it's certainly possible that Aegon IV said it to him. Whether he said, that's it, that's how I'll do this, I suspect it's probably different. I suspect that Aegon IV said this to him. Then Aegon IV died. Then Daemon went to the new king and said, actually, I know I'm engaged to this person, but can we break it off because I want to marry Daenerys? And Daemon said, no. That seems much more likely to me. Whether him having an agreement to have 2 wives is supposed to make him look bad, I don't think people look at the Targaryens and go, oh yeah, 2 wives, that's terrible, when Aegon the Conqueror clearly had 2 wives. Akatosh Ray asking, do you think that Daemon would have made a good king? Do we get enough information on him to make a guess on that? Is his lack of ambition until pushed to take the throne a good or bad thing? Yeah, it's intriguing that we don't know. From what we've seen, probably yes. But then it really depends on his reasons for not declaring earlier. If it's indecisiveness, then perhaps he wouldn't have been. If he did absolutely believe that he should inherit, but he didn't do anything about it, then maybe he actually wasn't the strong leader we might want from him. But what we see is that he seems to be a good fighter. He seems to have been charismatic. He certainly seems to have people who could rally behind him, all of which are good leadership abilities. Let's go to a question from Michelle Raimo saying, hello, Robert. Hope all is well with you and Dan the dog. It is. Thank you very much. One of my favourite passages from A Dance with Dragons is Barristan Selmy's internal monologue, basically saying love causes all of the war and death in Westeros. Rhaegar and Lyanna, Duncan the Small and Jenny of Oldstones, etc., etc. In that group, he states, Daemon Blackfyre loved the first Daenerys so much he rose in rebellion when denied her. But from my understanding, the Blackfyre rebellion came years later. And he had 9 children with Rohan of Tyrosh. My question is, was that really a part of the reason Daemon rebelled? Or is this just what Barristan believes? So this, I think, is one of the great things about the way that George R. R. Martin uses points of view to tell us not about history so much as about the person whose POV we're seeing this through. Barristan Selmy, we see time and time again, he has his own sort of moral code. He's quite old-fashioned. He's quite prudish. And he had an unrequited love when he was younger. It seems very clear that he never acted on, and he sort of part respects himself for that, but also part regrets it. And this is therefore, I think, very telling that he analyzes a lot of history through this prism of love has gone wrong. And so he sees Rhaegar and Lyanna, he sees Duncan and Jenny of Oldstones as these things that were causing problems. Now, you could, if you take a different perspective, you could say, well, actually, these are the solutions. Love is the solution. It's just that people are getting angry around the outside of it. But that's not where he is. He's seeing love as being the cause of the problem. And that tells you about who he is. Whether that's going to have some impact later on is interesting, but it does mean that it allows us to understand a few more things when we're getting his POV. The way that he treats Daenerys is through this prism that he has got. So if he sees her falling in love, how is that going to play into what he thinks has to happen? Because he might well think maybe falling in love is not the right thing, because love is the cause of all of these problems. It's not unrequited love, but love that has been denied more than anything else, that he's so very focused and fixated on. Ranabir Mitra saying, hope you're well, Robert. Thank you very much. What, in your opinion, is the reason why Daemon hesitated and saved Gwaine Corbray? Did this incident even happen? Hashtag modlove, hashtag GGMU. Absolutely. First signing of the season. Good. Why did he hesitate and save Gwaine Corbray? Did it happen? I think it did happen, because the people who wrote the histories basically are the Targaryens. And for that, it's in their interest to make him look bad. So if there's something in there that actually makes him look quite good, then I think we should add in particular weight. If the story was Gwaine Corbray, he defeated Gwaine Corbray and then he spat on his body and trampled all over him, or something terrible, then we might go, oh, that sounds a bit like propaganda. This doesn't sound like propaganda, so I think we should probably assume it is true. As for whether or why he did that, it's quite hard to tell, because we're just given the sort of the bare outline of the story. But the only real reason seems to be he'd been fighting this person for an hour, and when you get people like Eustace Osgrey, who said in that battle he was like, normally he fighting with other things, he was the best of men, but in this he was the warrior himself. Basically, Eustace Osgrey, in who we meet in the Duncan Egg stories, he basically says that Daemon Blackfyre, during the Battle of the Redgrass Fields, was like a god. He was fighting like a god. That's what he was saying. If he, as part of that, for 1 hour, was fighting against Gwaine Corbray must have also been pretty impressive. So this feels like him recognizing somebody who has fought incredibly well and nobly and brilliantly, and ultimately, yes, he did lose, but only just after an hour of really just being so close. So that he then, it makes sense to me that he does not want this person to be trampled on. That's what we're told. He didn't want him to be trampled on. If you're trying to ascribe a more Machiavellian approach to Daemon here, then this is clearly a hugely important fighter, member of the Kingsguard. I want him on my side when I'm king. This is the same kind of idea when we get to the battle, the Ruby Ford, when Rhaegar gets killed. Barristan Selmy was there, and he was on the losing side, but he was saved. Some people didn't want him to be saved. It has to be said, Roose Bolton said he should have been killed, but people like Ned said, no, we respect Barristan Selmy. We will let's not kill him now. He can be on our side once we win the war. And sure enough, he was on their side once they win the war. So that's the kind of feeling we've got there. this makes him look like a good person, Daemon. Even if it's for the Machiavellian reason of I'm going to want this guy on my side, that actually kind of plays quite well for him, because he could be. Some people, Maegor the Cruel, would have stomped all over him and shown that he was no match for him. Here he was raising this person back up, weighing Corbe up, and saying, you fought well. Question from Maura Lee, asking about whether Bloodraven choosing to fight on the side of Deeren II was anything to do with the prophecy, this prophecy of ice and fire. We're covering every single time we're going through this, we're asking the same sort of questions in a good way, which is, did that Song of Ice and Fire prophecy make it this far? My contention is probably it got lost with Baelor. But if anyone found it again, it will have been Bloodraven. Either getting this through his own magical means, or perhaps discovering some ancient texts, or maybe the Weirwood Network were onto him about it. This does, I mean, the argument here is that Deeren was the person who actually achieved what Aegon wanted to do all that time ago. Aegon the Conqueror came across with this vision of uniting the Seven Kingdoms, bringing them all together, because the prophecy needed him to be ruling a united Seven Kingdoms and for Targaryens to stay on the throne. Now, in all of that time, they'd failed until Deeren. Deeren, you could argue from the prophecy's perspective, is the most important Targaryen, because he was the one who finally managed to unite the Seven Kingdoms, and then was almost immediately faced with a civil war, which could have led to the Targaryens losing power, and managed to win it. So he has a hugely important role. Bloodraven was on that side. Is that because he knew the prophecy? Maybe. For me, I think that probably came a bit later. I think my best guess is that when we go up to the wall, when he goes up to the wall, he goes up at the same time as Maester Aemon, and they get to know each other quite well. They're there, I think, 13 years there on the wall together, and they obviously are both fascinated by prophecy. And and there are texts and things up there in Castle Black's library. That's the kind of place where texts could be hidden, and people like Baelor the Blessed wouldn't actually manage to get to them. So given the fact that Maester Aemon could also effectively order books from the library of the Old Town, so I think that what we're left with is that is the most likely point at which he starts to get really invested in this. He just happens to have been on, from his perspective, the right side earlier on. Zach Nedau saying, greetings from New England. Greetings to you. I'm sure many people ask similar questions, but I was wondering if you think Daemon would not have rebelled if it wasn't for Bittersteel whispering in his ear. First time question. Thank you for all the years of amazing content. Well, thank you very much for the question. Yeah, I've sort of answered this from various directions before, but I will answer this specific thing. If Bittersteel had not been pushing Daemon to rebel, I don't think Daemon would have done it. I think it's pretty close, and that would be a very Bittersteel would have gone on Aegon the Conqueror in his prime, the one who has the sword, Blackfyre, the youngest knight in the Seven Kingdoms. That it had to be Daemon. So that was the turning point, and I don't think that we would have had the Blackfyre rebellions if it hadn't been for Aegon Rivers. Callie Summers saying, "Hi Robert, I hope you're doing well." I am, thank you. I missed the Deer in the Second chat, but while catching up on it, I noticed the talk about the reason that Daemon got Blackfyre was that he was the true fighter. Wouldn't that have been a better argument for him having Dark Sister instead? Visenya, Daemon, the Dragon Knight, Bloodraven all get it for their abilities without being heir. So the point we were making last time, this has come a quote from Egg. We get the Swan Sword, which is a lovely little Duncan Egg story, and we come across Eustace Osgrey that I've mentioned before, who Eustace Osgrey was a lord, a relatively minor lord, but a lord who was fighting on the side of Daemon Blackfyre in the first Blackfyre rebellion. And Duncan Egg they meet him, and they have like a chat about the Blackfyre rebellions and Daemon Blackfyre and things like that. And basically, Eustace Osgrey says, of course, Aegon IV intended for Daemon to be king. He gave him the sword Blackfyre, the Sword of Kings. He wouldn't have given him that sword unless he wanted him to be king. At which point Egg pipes up and says, I was told by my family. No, he's undercover. Nobody knows that his family are actually the Targaryens. But the Targaryens told him that the reason why Aegon IV gave that sword to Daemon was because Daemon was a good fighter, and it would have been wasted in the hands of Deer II. Now, do we believe that? What I think we can believe is that is the story which has been passed down by the Targaryens. That's the official line, why he didn't get it. It's not, for me, neither end of this are particularly convincing. I don't think that it's very convincing that giving the sword was his way of saying, yes, I want you to be king, because he never actually said he wanted him to be king. Also, I think to have it that it was pretty meaningless, he was just giving it away to the best fighter, is deliberately underplaying the importance of that sword. So it's somewhere in the middle there. I think it was just Aegon IV going for shiggles. He was just that's what he wanted. He didn't ultimately have the guts to go the whole way. He probably did think that Daemon would have been the better king, but he never actually took that step. And Kelly Summers also asking, what would it have taken for Daemon Blackfyre to successfully take the throne? If Daemon offered the North independence or got another great house on his side, would that have been enough without dragons around anymore? This is really interesting. So why didn't he win? It was close run. I think that's the first thing you have to say. This was not a small, rubbishy little rebellion. The second one was. The first one was a proper rebellion. Half of the realm rallied behind Daemon. He lost in a hard-fought battle that he basically got slightly out-tacticked. His forces were all stuck down on the plain while the archers were allowed to get the higher ground. Now, what would it have taken to actually get him to win? It's slightly better tactics at that. Maybe getting some people up there spotting that there are some archers about to take up a very important position and actually get some people to stop them. That might have worked. But fundamentally, and I think where you're going with this is there anything that would have got him more than half. So more than 50% of the Seven Kingdoms on his side. And I think the short answer is that the biggest reason why he didn't win is that Diran II was actually quite a good and competent king. He was known as Diran the Good, which, given the different titles that some of these kings were given, Aegon the Unworthy was their immediate predecessor. But Diran actually, he seems competent. He doesn't seem particularly charismatic. He certainly wasn't a great fighter, but then he didn't try to be a great fighter. He delegated that to people who were obviously better at it than he was. And although we haven't heard all of the details of the things that he did during his reign, the clear implication is that he spent a huge amount of time just undoing the corruption of his father. And yes, there will be people who lose out from that, but also a lot of people who gain, and the nation itself gains from that kind of thing. So he'd had a good period of time. He had 12 years of ruling, and ruling well and effectively. He'd managed to bring Dawn into the Seven Kingdoms without any blood being spilt, a thing that his ancestors could not do. He had managed to secure good alliances with some of the free cities. He had managed to turf out all of the corruption in the City Watch, for example. He had done good things. If he had been anything like his father, Aegon IV, then I suspect that Daemon Blackfyre would have easily had the majority of people behind him. But it turns out that actually what we had is a pretender who's rising up against a actually generally quite well-liked king. That's the difference. That's the big difference, is that there wasn't a big black mark against him. Let's go to Michelle Raimo saying, since Eris I is next in line, will we be getting a Bloodraven live stream too? After all, everyone did believe he was the one ruling the realm. Yes, I will do. So I think next week, I may or may not do a live stream. Apologies for not being able to provide certainty right now. I haven't decided. But the next time, I think we need to do a Lord of the Rings one. We've not done a Lord of the Rings one for a little while. So we will do a Lord of the Rings live stream. Perhaps Legolas. Not talked about him for a while. But then when we come back, yes, we will do Bloodraven, because he is hugely important. Eris I, yes, is very important. Well, it's important that we cover him, but Bloodraven is so central during this period that we have to have a look. And what I've been trying to do with this is not just to go down the list of rulers. There was this ruler, then this ruler, then this ruler, but actually pause every now and then and go, okay, so who else was actually really important here? So we covered Rhaenyra, who isn't in the list of rulers, but clearly she's very, very important. We covered right at the beginning, Viserion and Rhaenys, because they effectively co-ruled with Aegon. So that's what I've been trying to do, is just to pick out not just the named rulers, but the people who actually and actively ruled, whether or not their name is in that list. Andrew K saying, half the realm, but none of the top echelon houses definitely backed the Blackfyres. That might have increased the Blackfyre chances. Yeah, it's true. We don't have a full roster of who supported whom, but certainly we get told of a lot of houses. I think the High Towers, for example, that sort of backed both, we're told. So they weren't willing to commit one way or the other, which says a lot about the High Towers at this stage, it has to be said. But yeah, if the Lannisters and the Velaryons and somebody else, like all come out hugely and en masse said we are behind Daemon Blackfyre, then it would have been a very different story. Charis Ballerina, did Daemon play a role in the Great Bastard's love triangle? Why did BS want Daemon to rebel? Wasn't his problem with Bloodraven and not Deeren, a good king? Yes, so the Great Bastard's love triangle is Charis Eastar, Bloodraven, and Aegor Rivers. Did Daemon play a role in that? I don't think so. As far as we can tell, he's not actively involved. He is, it's worth reiterating again, he is significantly older than Bloodraven, so he grew up different time to him, basically. So was he involved? No, but I think what happened is over time, and we see this again and again in Targaryen history, we get the court starts to separate. We had the Greens and the Blacks, the build up to the Dance of the Dragons, the court started to separate. We see that again in the build up to Robert's Rebellion. The court started separating into the Rhaegar supporters and the Aerys supporters. Here, the court is starting to separate. And so when you get two people who hate each other, they find themselves on opposite sides. They start playing a proxy war against each other through other people. Aegor Bittersteel knew that he could get at Bloodraven through Daemon and vice versa. So yeah, I don't think that he was actively involved in the love triangle itself, but I think he was used by those people. Rabbi Mitra saying, just informing you in advance, the Bloodraven stream will be 4 hours long and filled with questions and super chats. You might need to do 2 streams. Well, we'll start with one, see how we go. Yeah, it's what a guy! What a guy! It will be a great stream. I'm already looking forward to it. Oh, I think that actually is in terms of my questions from my patrons. I've got a couple more about other things, but if you've got more questions about Daemon Blackfyre, now's the time to drop them into the chat. I'll try and pick up a few questions there. Let's go to Justice Nuri saying, G'day, Robert from Down Under. G'day to you. As much as I love the Blackfyre Rebellion, my question is about the present story. At present, A Song of Ice and Fire. At present, most houses seem to only have a few immediate family members. There are, for example, no Stark or Baratheon cousins. This is despite the houses existing for thousands of years, but the exception is houses Tyrell, Lannister, Frey, which seem to have huge family trees with endless cousins. Why has George given these houses so many cousins alive in present day? Love your videos. Can't wait for the Bloodraven shirts to arrive. Well, good. I'm glad they're coming out to you. So, why is it that some houses have got many members and some houses have not got many members? I think the thing I would concentrate more on here is not the houses that have lots. That to me seems relatively normal. If you have large-ish families and then you are marrying people off to try and extend your influence, then yes, you'll have large, wider families. You get some, like the Freys, are obviously at the top end of what we might consider ordinary. But the Lannisters, who have various other, random cousins around and about, that seems like the normal state of affairs. The 3 obvious houses where this isn't the case are the Starks, the Baratheons, and the Targaryens. Now, the Targaryens, we have very good in-world story reasons for why there aren't many Targaryens. As I said, the Targaryen family tree got pruned a lot during Bloodraven's period, and after that, they basically married themselves. So the chances of them having an extended family started getting very limited. The Baratheons and the Starks, I think it's both just pragmatic story writing reasons. The Baratheons are a sort of an extent of House Targaryen anyway. They started out with what everybody assumed was Aegon's bastard half-brother. That's the starting point, and the Targaryens married into them 2 or 3 times during their time there. But for good storytelling reasons, if the Baratheons had lots of extra cousins, this would have made for a very different story, because what we have is, when Robert Baratheon goes, we only have 2 real people who, in his family, who can claim Stannis and Renly. So when you get rid of Renly, then you have Stannis and his 1 child. If there were lots of other cousins, then there would be thoughts of, well, who's next? If Stannis is saying he's king, then there should be a line of succession after him. But there isn't, because for story reasons, that needs to we need to just focus in on the Baratheons. Similarly, the Starks, for story reasons, we need the Starks to be either killed off or people thinking that they're dead, so that Winterfell can fall, and then we can have this grand northern conspiracy to try and get the Starks back. And also other intriguing things like, who did Robb name his heir in his will? That is significant because of the fact that there's only a small number of Starks. If you had lots of Stark cousins, then people would know who theoretically is next in line. Caius Ballerina picking up a question for Levac, saying, if the prophecy made it past Baelor, would Aegon have told Daemon instead of Daeron? It seems like a petty sort of thing he might do. Yeah, it's possible. Would Aegon IV have passed it on? Quite possibly. But one of the things which we mentioned when we were looking at Aegon IV, which was a little bit out of character, was when he decided to try and invade Dorne. Because when he was ruling, basically, he seemed to be trying to live at peace with people so that he could just live a happy life with the mistresses he wanted, the tourneys he wanted, all the people around him who were giving him the things that he wanted. And yet he suddenly got this idea, hey, let's build massive cyberpunk dragons, steampunk dragons. Let's get a great big fleet. Let's go and attack Dorne. That idea seems really left field. One possible explanation is because of the prophecy, that he thinks, well, I have to get Dorne involved. Would the prophecy being passed on down to Daemon make sense? Well, although we think of Daeron as being the person who brought Dorne in, and therefore this was helpful for the prophecy, in a strange sort of way, you could see how Daemon's actions are also being very aware of the prophecy. If he knows that the prophecy says that the Targaryens have to be united, and they have to be the head of a united 7 kingdoms, that explains why he would hold back from claiming the throne, because he knows that him claiming the throne would create a civil war. That's an entirely reasonable justification for him holding back. I don't think so, is the short answer. It's possible, but I think by this point the prophecy has disappeared. I think we've had Baelor, who will actively have tried to get rid of it. Then we've had Aegon IV, who actively doesn't seem like the person who would care about it. And I think the combination of them probably means it's not passed on. Ranabir Mitra saying, why would the prophecy stop with Baelor? There was a period of time when Aegon III had Viserys II as his heir. Surely Viserys knew the prophecy, right? Well, a very short period, but in that very short period, Aegon hated dragons, loathed dragons. He actively went out of his way, and this is understandable given what he'd seen and experienced in his young life. He went out of his way to get dragon eggs out of the Red Keep. He couldn't even bear to have dragon eggs anywhere near him. We're told repeatedly how much he did not like dragons. So the idea that he sees this great Targaryen ruling with dragons in order to do stuff, that doesn't quite fit right. Maybe he will have later, and we're told that partway through his reign, he suddenly decided that he would try and see whether he could hatch a few more dragons. That seems to be the change of heart then, partway through his reign, but not at the beginning. Question from Steampunk Dragons is a good name for a band. It's true. Question from Martin S. Actually, this was a question you asked last week, and I said I was going to come back and answer it this week. This is a Middle-earth Lord of the Rings question. I won't take too long over it because obviously this is a Song of Ice and Fire one. You were asking about the plague, which was believed to be started by Sauron. This is halfway through the Third Age. Left Gondor at the mercy of its enemies, except they'd been hit too. Would any other being have been able to design a plague hitting only the target group? Well, in terms of answering that question, I'm sure the Valar probably could, somebody of that level. But I think the important point to remember about that plague, what Sauron was trying to do, this is when Sauron was just trying to regroup. His objective at that point was just to be weakening Gondor's look over Mordor. He wanted Mordor back. And he couldn't do that while there were these watchtowers all the way around Gondor. So he weakened Gondor, and that allowed his people to go back into Mordor. That was the plan. If he killed off some other people who were maybe his allies, so what? That he achieved the thing that he wanted to do. Martin S. Again, actually in the chat this time, saying, what do you think would have happened had Eddard Stark gone along with Renly's plan to strike first, as it were, in season 1 of the Game of Thrones show, leaving aside Eddard's honor in stopping it? So Renly's plan to strike first to claim basically claim the throne and rule as Lord Protector while Joffrey's still young. What I think would have happened is that he would have still lost out somewhere along the way. The Lannisters, there's no way Tywin Lannister would have allowed Ned Stark to be ruling on behalf of Joffrey. That would never happen. So I suspect he would have had an accident or something along those lines, or they would have trumped up. Littlefinger would have found another way to be betraying him with some trumped up charges. So I think it's a nice idea. I think that but in the context of what George R. Martin was writing, he was wanting to show us more about Ned's character than this being an active thing that he might have pursued. Alaskan Punch, off-topic question. This is reflective rambling. Thank you very much. How bad was the Crown's debts at the start of A Song of Ice and Fire? We hear millions. Is that a few years or a lifetime? Yeah, I think it was 6-7 million or something. It's a lot, is the short answer. It's not the Crown's debts at the start of A Song of Ice and Fire. They can still carry on a day-to-day basis. It's you get Littlefinger shuffling bits of money around one place to another. But the Iron Bank is now starting to demand money be paid back. So that's the situation, is that if there had not then been a massive war, if the king that had followed, or the ruler that had followed, lived relatively frugally and maybe raised a few port taxes or something, just a little bit, without affecting things too, then they could have managed. They could have got by, but it had to be addressed. It wasn't the kind of thing anymore that you could just pretend wasn't there. Okay, let's have a quick flick through. Think that's me caught up with the chat as well. Okay, so with that, what I shall do is a last reminder. If you are watching this live or in a couple of days or so afterwards, last chance. A beautiful bit of merch. Art by Sanrixian. When in doubt, blame Bloodraven. Best, cheapest way to do that, to get hold of it, is to join my $10 or more patron level, and then just let me know details, size, where you want me to send you one of them. After that, it will definitely, down there, there's going to be a link to my merch shop, so you can still get hold of it. But now, until the end of the month, the last 2 or 3 days, is your last chance to get it effectively at a big discount. So that's that. I will be back in 1 or 2 weeks' time. We are going to be looking at Legolas. Then after that, Bloodraven. The epic look through who Bloodraven was, what his whole character arc is over such a long period of time. I'm really looking forward to it. Patrons, thank you so much for your support. Moderators, you were amazing again today, as always. If you are watching this back a little bit later, appearing somewhere around here is a link to other live streams that I've done. Appearing somewhere around here is a link to my Patreon page. That's all for this time. Take care, everyone, and I'll see you soon.